Welcome to Frameworks. This is a place for coaches who want more than just reps and sets. We dig into the principles, philosophy, and stories that help you coach with clarity, design with purpose, and keep chasing mastery. Today, we're digging into a classic that shaped an entire generation of strength coaches, and that is the Poliquin Principles. Charles Poliquin was one of the first coaches to bring real systems to strength training, and he was instrumental in my early days as a coach. He obsessed over details, tempo, balance, periodization, but he also left us frameworks that can stand the test of time. So in this episode, I want to share the 3 biggest takeaways that I believe every coach today can still learn from. Number 1, why structural balance is the foundation of performance, how training age should guide every prescription, and why short loading cycles usually beat long ones when it comes to progression and progress. If you've ever wondered what separated Poliquin from the crowd and how you can apply his frameworks today, this episode is going to be for you. So let's get into it. All right, so let's get into this one. For you guys that don't know who Charles Poliquin is, I'll take a second and just read his bio on the back of the Poliquin Principles. Before I do that, I just want to make it clear. What we're going to do today is I'm going to take 3 frameworks that I'm taking from this book. Gosh, it was challenging to land on 3, but I'm going to take 3 that most affected and impacted me while going through the PICP and just knowing Poliquin for many years ago. So let me read a little bit about Charles Poliquin based on the Poliquin Principles. So Charles Poliquin is one of the most accomplished strength coaches in the world. He has designed workouts for Olympic medalists in 17 different sports, world record holders in 10 different sports, and professional athletes in the NBA, NFL, NHL, MLB, and UK Premier League. He has lectured or consulted for a variety of high-profile organizations such as the U.S. Secret Service, Walt Disney Corporation, and the World Swimming Congress. The following athletes are among his most notable clients, and then there's a bunch of athletes, some that I'm sure you guys would know if you heard, but I won't read through all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some time and I'm going to walk through this. This book was originally written, I believe it was 1999 when he wrote the very first version, and then there were 3 versions from there. If you guys have not checked out this book, I highly recommend it. There's some really good stuff, goes deep in some areas, stays pretty broad in others, but really great read. And this, along with the PICP that I went through in the early days, so essentially that was Poliquin's education, really impacted the way that I approach strength training way back when. That was probably 2005, 2006. So highly recommend digging back into anything Poliquin. I guess it's kind of a little bit of a book review. I'm going to try to keep it really tight. That's why I only wanted to pick 3 things, so this thing didn't end up being 2 hours. But hope you enjoy it. I hope you get something out of this. Let me know as well. Do you enjoy this format? Or do you like me just going like stream of consciousness like we usually do for the previous episodes? So a little bit of a change up, so let me know how you guys enjoy this one. Framework number 1 that Poliquin laid out and discusses in the Poliquin Principles is the concept of structural balance. So Poliquin believed that your body is only as strong as its weakest link. So he created structural balance protocols. So these were essentially ratios between lifts that told you exactly where a person was limited. So an example was close grip bench press. Way back when, he said that your close grip bench press should be about 87% of your normal bench press or your wide grip bench press. He said that your external rotators should be about 9% of your bench press. So he laid out a bunch of different structural balance pieces in terms of comparing one lift to another lift. So there's some really cool stuff there. And as coaches, what do we really love? We love assessment. And we love priorities. So what this did for me and why I was really attracted to this idea early on was it gave me really clear priorities right out of the gates. So if I saw that the external rotation, the dumbbell external rotation should be 9 or 10% of the close grip bench press, and we're working on, I test that with someone and it's at 4 or 5%, that gives me a priority. That's something that I can work on. So I was really attracted to that idea, and I probably took it a lot further than needed to be and was trying to make everyone so precise, but that definitely isn't the point. It's just when we see those wide margins, they could be priorities. So when we think about why this matters, so strength without balance is essentially a ticking time bomb, right? So let's just imagine if someone has a 400-pound close grip bench press and they can only externally rotate for an 8RM 5 pounds, right? Being a little bit hyperbolic there. But what does that tell us? That means that the shoulder girdle or the external rotators probably aren't strong enough to support hitting 300-400-pound sessions in the bench press over and over and over again. So it says, hey, that might be a ticking time bomb. We should probably work on those external rotators and add some pulling into the program to balance out the anterior side and what we're doing with the bench press. So what this did and what Poliquin talked a lot about was fixing imbalances first, and maximum strength will follow naturally, or focusing on fixing those imbalances first before hyper focusing on, I just need to put on more weight on the barbell. So a lesson that we can take from this is just don't chase numbers until the foundation is aligned and built. That might sound extremely familiar for you guys that have been listening to this show for any amount of time, but we need to set that foundation first. And structural balance and structural balance protocols are one nugget of information to let us know, like, hey, is the foundation actually set or not? For you guys that are in CoachRx, we actually built out a feature all around structural balance. So we took, at OPEX, we took Poliquin structural balance protocols and we've refined it a lot about a decade and a half ago, and we came up with our own. But this was actually inspired by Poliquin. So when you guys go into the back end of CoachRx, if you guys are signed up for CoachRx, you'll notice if you go to metrics, and we'll have, back squat compared to front squat, right? So back squat compared to front squat, we're looking at 85% for the front squat. So we want your front squat to be 85% of that back squat. We want your deadlift to be 125% of that back squat. And then we're looking at, for you guys that do strength speed work, what should the power snatch and power clean look like? And then we also compare things to body weight. So we want to make sure that you're hitting a rear foot elevated split squat or a Bulgarian split squat with 33% of your total body weight in each hand. So you should be able to do that 8 reps per side at a 30x1 tempo. And then we look at weighted strict dip, dumbbell prone row, all of that. So it's pretty cool because as you test your clients inside of CoachRx, we're going to give you 3 colors. We're going to give you a red if you're out of balance. We're going to give you a green if you're within balance. And we'll give you an amber if you're quote unquote too strong. So that's not necessarily a red, but it's like, hey, calm down in this area. So that's framework number 1 that Poliquin brought to the game. It's like this idea of structural balance across exercises and across different body parts as well. Framework number 2 is training age. And I've used this in previous discussions, so I'll kind of leave my bias aside a little bit here and I'll talk about what Poliquin talks about. And then, of course, I'll kind of wrap in the way I look at training age as well. But one of Poliquin's greatest insights was that a trainee's training age, not just their chronological age, is something that should dictate their needs. Okay, so we've talked about this a lot, right? But beginners, what do they need? They need more motor control. They need more frequency. They need simple patterns. They need to learn the rudimentary stuff before you get into the complex, right? So build that pattern base or muscle based foundation, and then you will stack on top of that. So the beginners, they thrive on consistency, volume, and frequency. So that's something that Poliquin really hones in on with training age as it relates to beginners. And then when he moves to intermediates, he talks about how they can handle more accumulation, higher volume, mixed in with some higher intensity as well, paired with intensification phases. So this is exactly what we teach in CCP, right? It's like the beginner is doing a lot of accumulation, the intermediate's still doing a lot of accumulation, but they're also doing a decent amount of intensification because now they can actually do that. They can express that. They can light their light bulb up. So they need strength endurance. They're starting to work their way toward maximal strength because they already have, motor control. And then they're starting to work on that foundational hypertrophy to get ready to really lift some heavier loads. And then we get into advanced trainees. So nervous systems now can handle heavy neural stress, but they also need a lot of time to recover from that neural stress. So requires a little bit more variation, and you kind of dip in one phase and dip out of it, and you're not sitting there for 12, 16 weeks like you might have with a beginner or an intermediate. And you're circling back to motor control too, because you want to continue to refine movement, right? So if we don't use it, we can lose it. So we just need to make sure that we're always moving really well. And Poliquin talked about that a lot with advanced trainees. Poliquin made it really clear, you can't skip steps. If a client hasn't mastered the basics, throwing them into advanced loading schemes or advanced protocols, and he was one to have a lot of advanced protocols, but is really clear on who should and should not be doing those those advanced protocols. So a lesson that we could take away from this is Training Gauge is the ultimate filter. It tells us what they can do or what they can't do, but it also guides us into like, hey, here's a prerequisite of what we need to do before we go to the next stage. All right, this next one, this is probably the framework that I've really taken to heart the most in my own program design. And it's the concept that training cycles should not be too long, right? Like we should dip in and out of training cycles with a decent amount of frequency. So Poliquin pushed against the old school model of long 12-week linear cycles. His belief was the body adapts pretty quickly, especially as we get into the intermediate and advanced stage. And often he would take people through cycles of training that lasted 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. The 3 and 4 week training models, you guys will see that in his old programs, were probably the most popular. And what he would do something really interesting. So he would take like a 12-week cycle and then he would split it into 4-week splits. So essentially you could call it a 12-week program, but every cycle changed every 3 to 4 weeks. And he did that quite often, especially with squat-based programs. And it was because he believed that the body adapts quickly, especially when you're training appropriately. So he did those short loading cycles with frequent but precise variation. An example of that, so a person might be doing a German volume training cycle for 3 weeks and then shift immediately to a 5x5 quote unquote accumulation block. And Poliquin just loved GVT. He had a bunch of variations of GVT and even created some advanced GVT models. Instead of like 10 reps times 10 sets, he did a lot of like 6, 7, 8 reps times 10 sets. And you saw a lot of people get really, really strong because volume was high, but intensity was also moderately high there as well. Another might progress from 4 sets times 8 reps at a 3-0-1-0 tempo, and then he'd progress that to a 5x6 at 4-0-1-0. And then he progressed that to a 6x4 at a 5-0-1-0, each lasting only a couple weeks, and exercise selection staying pretty much the same, especially in those compound movements. And why did he think this mattered? Based on a lot of the things that he talked about, is it prevented stagnation and it kept the nervous system fresh, or let's call it fresh without being too overly stimulated while still being stimulated. So he did a really good job of like dipping his toe in and dipping his toe out pretty frequently. And then it allowed multiple adaptations across a year instead of hammering one approach until there was no adaptation to be had. So if you looked at like a macro cycle, like a 12-month macro cycle, you might be rolling through 20 programs within that 12 months. But when you looked at it, he did a really good job of flowing from one cycle to another or connecting one cycle to another, where to the naked eye, it almost looked like a single cycle. A lesson that I would take away from this one is just rotate variables before the body adapts. Short cycles keep clients engaged in progressing without burnout and without overdoing it on the tendons and the ligaments and the joints. And how we can kind of connect that to working with clients and keeping them engaged is it does just that. It keeps people engaged because they're coming in and out of these training cycles quite frequently, because so everything always feels nice and fresh, and before they can get bored of whatever they're doing, they're already getting ready to transition to the next cycle. All right, now let's talk about some ideas in applying these 3 frameworks in your own coaching practice. So number 1, structural balance. Get in CoachRx, right? Get in CoachRx, assess your clients. We have the feature in here already where we're essentially giving you the answers to the test, right? So get in there, assess ratios between key lifts and the lifts that matter to your individual clients. And we understand like every lift inside the back end isn't going to be necessary to assess, but there are some like the bench press and the dumbbell external rotation and the rear foot elevated split squat, all those, like everyone should be testing those. Get in, assess those ratios between the key lifts for your individual clients, build accessory work around weak links, rotator cuffs, hamstrings, mid-back, make balance your starting point before you chase quote-unquote performance goals. Training gauge. So define each client's training gauge during your assessment. Beginners, more frequency, simpler patterns, slower tempos, intermediates, accumulate volume, then move to intensity. For your advanced trainees, precise variation. So vary things quite often. Revisit motor control. You know, remember that concept, if you don't lose it, or if you don't use it, you lose it. So make sure that they're continually going back and working on motor control, and take them through shorter training cycles. All right, and then finally, short loading cycles. So program in 2 to 4 week blocks. Just test that out. See how your clients adapt to that. See how they enjoy it, right? You might see some upside there, but the most important thing is that you're getting results with your people. So play with that and see if you implement those shorter loading cycles, if you can start getting some results from your clients. Change one variable at a time though, okay? So is it reps? Is it tempo? Is it rest? While keeping principles intact. Use these cycles to teach repeatability, avoid plateaus, and just see what progress means based on what progress means for each individual client. All right, so we'll close it there. Just going back, man, I have so much respect for the knowledge that Poliquin brought into strength and conditioning. Can't say it enough. The guy had a huge impact on me and how I approach strength training specifically. And I know my main mentor, James Fitzgerald, he also had a big impact on him. And James did a really good job of taking some of the stuff that Poliquin put out there in resistance and strength training and connecting it and adding it to James's brilliance in energy systems training. But Poliquin's brilliance wasn't in the magic in exercises or supplements, although he sold a lot of supplements. It was the systems that he created. He created some really interesting systems. We'll just keep it at that. Structural balance reminded us that strength without alignment is fragile. Training age reminded us that context is really, really important, and it kind of led us into this path of individualization. And then the principles of short loading cycles reminded us to keep progression fresh, but to also keep it principled. So hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. If you are not already, please subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this. Give me a like, drop comments, and we will see you next week.